Go ahead.
Okay. All right. The floor is yours.
Talk. Right. Well, wait for me outside. I'll see you now. I'm fielding off children. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. So Fabris and I are going to co-present this workshop. Children. We are not workflowr experts. Well, I am not. I think Fabris might very well be. We assisted with this workshop at the useR conference, as you can see in the over here on the first slide. So, and we presented it to our ladies group in Johannesburg, Pretoria, South Africa, in August. So we are very happy to present it to you as well. So the idea is, so I'm going to present the first half and then Fabris will take over. Please shout if you want to ask some questions. Let me just see if I can get the chat visible. Yes, there we go. Okay, so if you have any questions, I will see you. I can't see hands up. So if you have a question, just pop it into the chat directly. Or just put your mic on and interrupt me. No problem either. All right. Yes, so I am a statistician / applied mathematician. I used to use MATLAB a lot until I found R, and R is really fantastic. Definitely something I'm happy to learn about more every single day. So the idea is of workflowr is reproducible code. All right. When we did this workshop, we did it as interactive, so you had to have a GitHub account set up and RStudio Cloud and all of that, but we'll just show you how everything works, and then you're very welcome to run it afterwards yourself. Okay. Right, so the instructors that did it at workflowr were John Blisnick and Peter Carbonetto. So the package is theirs, and we were just there to assist them, so credit to them. They've done an excellent job. And then when we assisted at useR, we were all, this is the team of TAs that assisted. So I think we did a really nice job. And we had little breakout rooms, and so it was quite well. Well, it was very enjoyable, I think, for the presenters and us, as well as for the participants. Okay, so this was just some acknowledgements in terms of when it was presented at workflowr. Okay, so the basic structure of what we're going to show you is as follows. We won't use this amount of time because we're not doing breakout rooms or anything like that. But there are sort of 3 parts. Okay, so I'm going to present this first part, and then Fabris will take us through the rest. Okay, are the left side of the slides cut off? Is everyone seeing that? It is.
I am seeing that.
Okay, let me try. Let me try again. Is that better?
Yes. That is better for me.
Cool. Yes, that's much better.
Oh, wait. Oh, you know what it is? It's my... Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, so the idea is, how can I make my R code more reproducible for myself and for others? So I want to just have a quick little quiz or discussion, and you can pop stuff into the chat. How do you think you can make code reproducible? And it doesn't have to be R code, it can be general code. And why should you make it reproducible? Just some quick thoughts in the chat, if anyone wants to comment, and then I'll... So I think in terms of, I'll share my view of why I should make my code reproducible for myself, is that, yes, like Megan says, to catch your mistakes. So often you'll be working on code and then you'll leave it for a bit and you'll go back and you will have not commented it or anything, and then you won't remember what you did, and you basically start from scratch, and that's obviously highly unproductive. So I think for yourself, yes, Stephanie says you can build off work, so others can build off your work, exactly. Include comments and documentation. You guys are making so many comments. I'm so impressed. So others can catch your mistakes. Very good as well. So it's sort of more shareable. Others can easily run. Amanda says you can easily run and understand your code. Exactly. Future self. That's what I said. So your future self can understand the code. Madeline says, Madeline probably, only knows how to use the hash to make notes for myself. That's perfect. That's also where I was before I did this workshop. Perfect. At least you're doing it. Anna says, organizing your data, scripts, and images. Exactly. Transparency. I like that a lot, Rakia. Help others and to help you think more clearly. I like that as well. So very, very valid. So I last year I attended the Spatial Stats Conference in Barcelona, and there's a Professor Pabesma. He's quite huge in spatial stats, and he actually did a plenary. And one of the things he said in his plenary, I think he took the opportunity to sort of make a scene a little bit, but he's quite a nice guy. He actually refuses to review any paper that's sent to him for publication if there isn't code that he can reproduce it, which is quite a heavy ask. I mean, I don't know if I could, even after doing this workshop, package my code that I could share it with a paper that I publish. But the point is correct. You know, you could be manipulating your results. Hopefully no one's doing that, but I'm sure there are people that are manipulating results or only do one sort of simulation and then that everything works type of thing. So I think that especially as the world becomes more data driven and almost all fields and not just statistics rely on code, we have to be able to be more open and share codes and make it transparent. I think the transparency is really important. So this is exactly, this little cartoon here captures exactly what, sorry, there we go, what we've already said. Don't worry, you don't have to start your code from scratch. You can reuse the software that the previous person on the project wrote several years ago. Are there instructions on how to use it? I doubt it. Is the code commented? Not likely. Where are the files? Who knows? This is going to be painful, just a scratch. And I think so that doesn't have to be someone else's code that's given to you, just your own code that you open 6 months later has that. And I think this is exactly what a lot of us have experienced before. So this is a sad slide, unfortunately. The study results are discouraging. So you can see there, this paper comes there from in 2009. And these are efforts to replicate published analyses. So there's a huge chunk, which you can see is quite clearly more than half of the circle, which you cannot reproduce. Quite a big chunk can reproduce in principle, can reproduce with some discrepancies, can reproduce from process data with some discrepancies and partially. So even these are not ideal. And a lot of it is that the data is not available, software is not available, the methods are maybe unclear, and you might get a different result. So this doesn't make one feel very encouraged. What are our thoughts on data availability? So if you were able to at least share your code, maybe it wasn't too complicated, or you've already mastered something like workflowr. So we ignore the code side of it. What are your thoughts on sharing data? What do we do if we have data that's got IP attached to it, or from a company, or how do we allow for reproducible research if the data can't be shared? Any thoughts, anyone, or any experience of someone in that sense? It must be masked. So correct, Claire, but then how does the how will the user reproduce it if they don't have the unmasked data? I don't have an answer. I'm just facilitating a discussion. So I think if you've done available by request, that's nice. So sometimes it's not though. Like I know I have, for example, a crime data set for Khayelitsha. Khayelitsha is one of our massive informal settlements in the Cape. It's one of the biggest in the world and the biggest crime centers as well. And it's data that we got from the police in the area, but it's not something I can just give to anyone because it's sensitive. I'm also working on COVID-19 analysis in South Africa, and I've got access through our NICD, which is our disease control center. But I'm not allowed to share that, which is not right. So there's a lot of sort of secrecy in South Africa in terms of sharing data like that, because the public might overreact and stuff like that. Licensing not to be used for commercial purposes, 100%. I like. So I think that's just, I think this data thing is something that we can definitely talk about, not even tonight, but it's something that we have to continue discussing amongst our colleagues and as we do our work, because it's difficult when it's sensitive, it's difficult when it belongs to a company, and there's not always an easy solution. If it's not sensitive, I would always advocate for share the data. I think that's really important. Anyone else? Okay. Okay. Right. So, sorry, my Windows keeps popping up there. Right. So I think a lot of us have probably done publication only with not reproducible, necessarily handed in with the publication. Maybe some of you have done publication and added the code, and maybe the data wasn't sensitive and you could add the data in. Then when you get to linked and executable code and data, then you've got a full replication of your paper. And this is what Ping in 2011 suggests as the gold standard. This is what we need to work towards to do good ethical research. Not always possible in terms of the data, but if you can at least do executable code easily, then we're on the way towards this gold standard. And this is what the workflowr package assists with. Right, so tips. So normally you're working in a team, right? A team, you have something to do, you all interpret the instructions in a certain way, and then you end up with different outputs, right? And this is what could happen if you've written some code. Either you yourself or another, maybe you give it to one of your students or a colleague and you didn't comment your code correctly or efficiently and they really don't know what's going on, they might end up with another output. So you can have the same task at hand, but you end up with different results because the interpretation is different. And there's a nice analogy here in terms of the kitchen. So you've got a whole bunch of cooks. There's one recipe that everyone's using, but we all end up with different things. Okay, and I think that's exactly what happens when we do. If you know, when you code, you've got your own personal way of coding, which is fine. I tell my students this all the time. They want memos for code, and I tell them I'm not giving you memos. It's important that you find your own way of coding, but obviously you want the results to still come out as reasonable. So making it reproducible, adding your comments, all really, really important. Stephanie's found the paper. Very helpful. One big advantage of Zoom meetings. So the idea is to combine your instructions, your results, and your interpretation into one unit, and that gives you reproducible code. Right, so the first thing is to use literate programming, and that's why we advocate for R Studio and specifically for R Markdown. For those of you who haven't seen Markdown before, maybe you've just used R a little bit. I don't even program in normal R anymore because R Markdown is just fantastic. So these little blocks here in the gray are called code blocks. And in between, you write as you would in Word or LaTeX. What's really nice is if you use LaTeX, you can write LaTeX code. So you can write your equations and everything in here. And then you knit it, which effectively compiles it into either a Word, a PDF, or an HTML file. And then you've sort of got a report. So what's really nice, especially if you're sort of thinking out how you're doing your work, is that you can write a little sort of paragraph for yourself. Okay, I'm going to try this next. You run it. It doesn't work, but don't delete it. Keep it there as sort of evidence for your future self when you open the code again as this didn't work, which is sort of a version. That's a naive way of doing version control. But that's what's nice about not having only code, but also text in a file. So this is what a .rmd file does, or Markdown, if you haven't seen that before. Just check there's no questions. Okay, right. So this uses knitr. So knitr is the package that obviously converts this into a PDF or a Word or a HTML file, and R Markdown is the language, the sort of language that's used inside this to make a report type of document. I found this really nice. I did a report for we do sort of consultation in our departments. I was helping a business management student and he wanted all these graphs, and I wrote very few lines of codes, and then I ended up giving him a 550-page Word document. And they said, "Oh, you've done so much work." But meanwhile, I just, had some loops. So it's very impressive to the non-coder. Okay. Second, so that's the point. The first point is that the way you write your code can be much more informative, like in an R Markdown file. The second thing is that you should record your changes. Okay, so before learning about workflowr, I would just save a new file. This is the date of my file, and then obviously you just make sure that every time you open it, you save it as a new file. But there are much more sophisticated version control methods. So that's obviously really important. So in terms of baking, if we go back to that analogy, some comments you would have made to yourself if you were working in the kitchen. If you were a sole baker, you wouldn't do that. But it also would be good for you in your future self if you bake that again, to make sort of notes like this for yourself. On this date, I realized I should add more sugar. It's not sweet enough. It didn't bake long enough on the 1st of March, etc. So this is done with a Git or GitHub, or Git hosted on GitHub in the workflowr package. So that's why you have to have a GitHub account linked to it. And every time you edit it, and this is obviously especially nice if you're working on a team, you make a comment about what you change. And this is what Git is built for. Right, so what is GitHub? GitHub has all the recipes in terms of our program, in terms of our kitchen cooks analogy, and you put all the recipes on GitHub. That's the idea. So all the recipes in terms of every time I make a change, we record that on GitHub. Okay, the next thing is that you should use relative instructions. I think we've all had that situation where someone sends you code and it ran on their computer and you can't run it because you don't have relative instructions. So for example, in terms of baking, you might say, one cook might say, bake the oven on the 5th rack, right? But that happens to be that oven has 5 racks, but your oven has 4 racks. So a more relative instruction would be bake the oven on the bottom rack, because then it doesn't matter what oven you're working with, and in terms of coding, what computer system you're working with. And obviously the most common thing is in R is use relative paths to the file. So don't use this, because on your computer, you're not going to have the C drive uses John, his Dropbox, etc. You will have data raw.txt. And if you make it a project in R, then it knows where that is. So projects in R, which you'll see when we open up the exercise, allow you to not have to put in this whole path here. Yes, it's a relative path. As long as you have the data folder, which you'll see the workflowr actually makes all your folders for you and actually helps you make pretty organization of your code. So not just that it's reproducible, it's actually in a standard organized way, which is really nice as well. Okay, and then also dealing with randomness. So if you're doing something where you're doing simulations, it's important that the simulation can be reproduced. Okay, and obviously by definition, the simulation has some randomness attached to it. So for example, give me 100 random numbers sampled from a standard normal distribution. If someone else runs it, they're not going to get the same 100 numbers. So it's the same as saying a dash of salt. One cook is going to make a dash, maybe another cook's fingers are bigger, so the dash is bigger. So that's something that should really be taken into account if you want to be 100% reproducible. And to do that, you set your seed. Right, I think we've all set seeds before, but what's important with workflowr is it forces this to happen. So it's very much controlling the randomness as well in your code. So the idea of workflowr is that it's doing all of these things for you in the background. So it sets it up. It's almost unavoidable for you to make sure that it's reproducible. So you worry about how you're coding and not all these little things. Oh, I forgot to set the seed. Oh, I changed the seed, etc. Okay, so record the tools and ingredients. what pots did you use, back to the cookie analogy, what brands, expiration dates, and in terms of computing, what was the operating system, the version of R, the version of the R packages. I think we've all experienced errors when you have the wrong version of R and therefore the packages are not compatible or things like that. I know my students have, and they find it very difficult to know what to do when they experience something like that. Google doesn't seem to be an option for some reason. So in terms of that, workflowr also takes that into account. So it will record your session info. And so if you type in your R, just in plain R, session info, you will get the information of what this code is running on. And this is then saved into your session code. So whoever wants to reproduce it, know, oh, you ran that, but to get these results on this computer, on this platform, and therefore mine might be different because of that. So, and there's your package versions and all of that. Raha says, I've had some issues setting seeds in R Markdown. It seems to be different than how you would do it in a regular R script. What is the process in workflowr? So workflowr, I haven't experienced, there we go, Vabash is on it. It uses the current date. Does that assist, Raha? I must say I haven't seen that issue in, well, I must say I haven't used a seed in R Markdown. I now feel like I want to go test it, see what happens. Ra, maybe you can expand. What are the, what issues do you get? Does it not reproduce correctly? Aha, okay, interesting. All right, we can experiment. Okay, so this session info is something that workflowr will also record for you each time you make a change and you commit it to GitHub. So also, if you're cooking in a kitchen, you clean your kitchen each time. So you clean the bowls, you throw out unused ingredients, and you turn off the stove burners in the oven, because otherwise your house is going to burn down. And in terms of this, workflowr cleans up your coding session. So when you close R or R Studio, it will ask you to save your workspace, and that's your environment variables. And workflowr insists that you don't save that, because that you want to, it must be reproducible. So if you have your variables already saved there, it can confuse your code. So that gets cleared every time. So workflowr by default says never. All right. Now, so if you want something different, you must obviously just save it manually. But the idea is that if you want it to be really reproducible, you don't want those errors to pop in to confuse the matter. Right, so workflowr, that was all the build up to this slide. Workflowr is automated reproducibility with workflowr. So it's not just about reproducibility, it's also about it being automated. So you don't have to think about all the yucky things in the background. So like LaTeX for me is something like that, where it's automating your format for you. Word, you have to worry about, did you choose your borders correctly? You know, what is the font size, all of that. Whereas LaTeX, put your figures in the right places for you where it thinks it's pretty, make sure the fonts are the same. That's like an automated way of writing a document. All right, so workflowr combines literate programming. So that's in terms of R Studio using knitr and R Markdown. It uses version control, Git, and it hosts it on GitHub. So it actually makes a little website. You'll see when we do the exercises now, where your code is. So you can actually share in your paper a link to the website where the code is, which is also very fancy, if nothing else. So it's organized, okay, through literate programming. It's reproducible because we've got version control on Git, and it's shareable because it's web hosting on GitHub. So organized, reproducible, shareable, data science in R. I mean, everything you want in your research, or not necessarily research work you do. Okay, so this is just a summary of what we've said. So it's literate program, so all the analysis is done in R Markdown. You've got your version control through Git, so that tracks your RMD and your HTML files. So it's not, we're not using in workflowr, we're not knitting our RMD to PDF or Word. It's specifically going to HTML because we want to put it on that website to share. It enforces relative paths, so it will warn you if that's not happening. It always sets the seed for you, as Vabash said, with a date. It records your session information, so it summarizes for you at the end, and it will always clear your workspace out so that you run on a clean session. Because otherwise that r.data file will be saved in your project, and we don't want that because it will mess up your reproducibility. Okay, so this is just a little, this is what you will see when we show you now in our Markdown. So it does a little, this is the checks to show that it's done all those things. And this is a little visual that you'll see down in your bottom of RStudio in one of your viewing windows. So it does all of this automated for you, which is really nice. Okay, and Peter is one of the developers. It's got your past version. So you click on this past version tab, you'll scroll down. When you see the example now, obviously there's not going to be lots of past versions, but the idea is if you did it yourself, you would see all of those. Okay. And if you click on each of those, you'll see it links to GitHub directly, so you can see exactly what was done in that file. Okay, this was just acknowledgement of where you got all the little graphics from. It's from this Noun project website. You will have got I think we did put the links to the slides in. Yes, Stephanie put the links to the slides in, so then you can obviously click on the links to see where they go. Right. So now I'm going to hand over to Fabris.
Thanks, Inga. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, do you guys see my screen?
Could you make it just a little bit bigger?
So let me just go to the slides and we'll do it from there. Can you see?
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. I'm going to keep it in non-present mode because it's a lot of the way that they set up the slides. It's a lot of copying and pasting to the RStudio project. So it just makes it easier for me. So just shout if you can't see it. We'll try and make it bigger. And I also am just looking for the chat window, wherever that is.
Vabash, I'll put the link to the RStudio Cloud project in the chat for you.
Cool. And if you can maybe just keep an eye on the chat because I have absolutely no idea where it's gone.
I will do so. I think it's mine popped behind. She has 3 screens, but she can't see the chat.
Yeah, okay, cool. I've got it now. Okay, cool. So this was one of the so the example that they used during the use R tutorial. So a lot of times we will get files from our colleagues that is supposed to be some research that we can also run, but then we run it and we experience lots of problems. We also do it to ourselves. We are not kind to ourselves. I think reproducibility it's a twofold for yourself as well as for the community or for your colleagues, as we've talked about before. Okay, so they set up the RStudio Cloud project. So that's the one that Inga has put in the chat. I've already opened it up because it takes quite a while to load. So this is the project that they've set up. The first thing to note is that you need to just save a permanent copy for yourself as you're working on it. So it's just a temporary project otherwise. So I'm going to do that.
Vabash, I think you must see if you can zoom in there because the R cloud looks quite small, the text.
Okay.
I think you can.
Let me wait for it to.
Yeah, wait.
Wake up. Yeah. don't know why. It's because I don't have any file open. I'm like wondering why is it not? Why can't I see the Control++ to view my code bigger? Can you guys see the code at least a bit better
that's
now?
good. I think go one more bigger.
Now?
Yeah, that's better. Is that okay
Yeah,
with everyone?
I think that's good for me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so they've deliberately added some errors into this file just for us to play with. So it's based on this blog post that was done by Kaylin. They tried to reproduce it. So it's just it's a machine learning model. It's a decision tree that tries to use elements of a song to try and see which genre does it actually fit in. Is it rap, rock, etc. So as we spoke about before, so the basics of an analysis is you have some kind of data, some raw data. You do some data processing with it, then you do some machine learning model on it, and you want to now share this code with your colleagues or with other people that are you would like to share it with. Okay, so we're going to go to this part. So we had to break out into like breakout rooms during the tutorial and try and figure out what was going on. Okay, so maybe you guys can also help me. I'm going to go to this spot. What do you think is the problem here? Like the error here that they're trying to point us to?
Free chocolates for the first answers.
Yay, there we go. So yes, just like the cook in the kitchen who said bake it on the 5th rack. Instead of saying bake it on the bottom rack, our friend has put some absolute path in here. So we can fix this first error just by taking all of that out. And the reason we know that is we can see that Spotify CSV is here. Okay, cool, let's try again. Uh-oh, another one. So any ideas here? So it's complaining about the R part. Could not find function R part. Yep, it's a missing library. Okay, so if you didn't know what library that comes from, because this is code somebody gave you, you can say R part is in which package? Okay, seems like it's in the R part package. Cool. So we come in here. Oh, another one. Any ideas about this one? So it looks like predict guess. Yeah, can't find a predict guess.
I'll give a hint. There's no, obviously you don't have the code to look at, but the predict guess was not something that was anywhere in any of the code chunks above there.
Yes, very cool. Yeah, it's supposed to be predict random. And this often happens, right? Because we do our programming, like it's an iterative process. So while we're busy doing it, we run a code chunk, we control enter on some lines of code. Then we decide, oh no, I want to actually rename this to predict guess, but we forget that we actually have it previously in our code, and we've called it predict random there. So this is one of the things is that during the iteration is why you want to actually restart your R code often if you weren't using workflowr. So you want to keep restarting so that you know, hey, like what's I've written here can be reproduced by somebody else, because then I don't have anything in my environment. Okay, cool. So we at least now have some kind of analysis. So we can see this is the model. We're going to jump back here. Okay, so then we went through these problems. So it was an absolute path, a missing package, and a renamed variable. Okay, so now these errors happened and you can actually solve it yourself other ways, right? You could, if it's an absolute path, you can run it on your computer, then you can give it to your friend and say, please run it for me. Then they run it, they experience errors, and then you fix the errors as you come across it, right? Or you could use workflowr. The same thing with the missing package and a renamed variable. We usually, if you're diligent and you keep restarting your R session, then that can help, as well as there's something called R script. So it also will run your R code, or you can use workflowr. Okay, so now we're going to start this workflowr project. Okay, so the RStudio Cloud has it already installed for you. But if you wanted to install it on your own machine, you'd have to install packages workflowr. Okay, where's my console? Okay, cool. Now you can see there's a workflowr project that has been started here. Okay, this configures your Git connection. So you only have to set it up once for your machine. You can also reset it for each project. If your projects are, some may be personal, some may be for work, and you may use different GitHub or GitLab names or Bitbucket names. So you can set it up for different profiles that you use. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to create an actual workflowr project. So far, all we've done is like fix the errors on the file that we received. Now we're going to turn it into a workflowr project. Okay, so you can, in this case, we're converting an actual pre-existing project into a workflowr project. So we need to use this like existing equal to true. I think there's also a way through the file projects, you can actually create or start a workflow project. So it's one of the options. So you start off already within a workflowr project and you don't have to do the workflow start, this command. This directory is just a relative path. So it's just saying this current directory. So you're setting up the workflowr project in this directory. Cool. Now, I don't know if you noticed, previously we had no folders in here. We just had a couple of files. Now we've got these folders. So the main one is your analysis folder. That's where all your RMD files will go. So if you see at the moment, we currently have this about index license. And the docs is actually where it builds your HTML files too. So when it knits everything together, when you build your site, all of your HTML documents reside in here. Okay. Okay, so that's just here what he's saying. Okay, let's try building this, just this. Okay, if you see here that it's only built the about, index, and license. So basically only what was in your analysis folder, nothing else. But here we have like these checks that we were talking about. So you can see that it passed the checks, this R Markdown file. Here's my repository version. I wouldn't have any past versions, just the current one. Okay, but now how do we get our actual RMD file that we worked on, the Spotify one, to actually be on our page? So we still have to do a couple of renaming of files. This is just moving them around because currently they're in folders that workflowr can't understand. It needs it in the analysis folder so it can create the HTML files. It needs your data in a data folder, and then it's going to talk to that data folder for any data artifacts you have. And it doesn't want the Spotify HTML that we created when we first ran, when we were fixing everything. Okay. So now you'll see it moved everything in the right place. So we've got our Spotify is here now. And our data is where it should reside, in the data folder. Okay, but one problem is now the data is sitting in the data folder. So we'll just have to change this relative path again. And then we'll have to rebuild it. Okay, so now we've got our workflowr, the Spotify analysis is in here, but you can see we've got a check mark, like something's not lekker here, right? And this is because we've got one R Markdown file that's actually not being tracked at the moment. And that's this one, the Spotify one. So it doesn't know about it as yet because we haven't actually committed that change to Git. Okay, so this is just changing the path, and then we built it. Okay, so this is where you actually link to those files. So in the HTML, or eventually we're going to host a website. So it's going to be shareable via a website, and you can send your colleagues to this website to go and see your analysis. But in order to do that, it uses behind the scenes an index.html file. Then you need to put all of your different analysis in that actual index.html so it knows, like when you click a link, where to go to. So this is just going to link it up. Okay, so that one is in my index.rmd. So here it's just a basic bare bones file, and all your analysis you can put as links. So I don't know if you are familiar with R Markdown. So all this does is, this is what will be displayed on your HTML page, your index page. And this is actually what it talks to. So it's gonna go and look for Spotify.html, and it looks within the docs folder. That's why it builds everything behind the scenes. You don't need to worry about it. You do everything in your analysis folder. So you create your files, you save it to your analysis folder, and behind the scenes, workflowr does its magic, and when it's rendering your site, it only talks to the docs folder, which has all of your analysis in it. Okay, we can run the workflow build again. Okay, and here we have our link to our Spotify analysis. We open it up, and this is very cool. We've got everything we need in here. And the session info is also at the bottom. So it says which version we're running, what packages we're using, and all of the essential information for reproducibility. Okay, so then the publish. So build is just like kind of also like a knit-r process that's being leveraged behind the scenes. So instead of knitting just one file, it's kind of knitting this website for you, right? It's knitting this project for you. This publish is actually going to now do a Git commit. So Git is only lying on your machine at the moment. We haven't yet hooked it up to GitHub. So all it's going to do is create a new hash for you that's going to be with this now analysis added. And you can see this message here will be your commit message. So it's the equivalent of your Git commit message that you add every time that you add files to your Git repository. Cool. And now it looks like we don't have any crosses. It's not angry with us. We look like we did everything nicely. Yeah, you should have past versions now. So you can see this is when I started it, and now it's got a different hash for when I added the Spotify RMD. And we can also go to our Spotify analysis. And the same thing, we can see, okay, what are the checks? And here you can see they've set the seed to today's date. And it tells you when anything's wrong. So it also looks for you if you've got relative parts or absolute parts. So that's quite useful. It'll tell you, hey, like you need to look at this because it looks like it's an absolute part instead of a relative part. Also, a lot of us, sometimes we're running analysis and we'll have a cache. So sometimes, I don't know if you guys do it, but I do it quite often, is to put cache equal to true, because that part of that code chunk ran for a long time and I know that it's not going to change. So I just want to cache that results. But this will warn you because it actually doesn't want cached results. It wants you to have a clean run. So it wants you to actually take out the cache equal to true for it to run the entire analysis as though it was on a clean build. Okay, now we have to create a repository on GitHub. So this is my GitHub account. It's going to be a public repository. Cool. So now I need to link it up. So the link up is just this workflow git remote. And you also only have to do this once for that project, that workflowr project. And this is just telling it where your actual repo is lying. Okay, I'm gonna Replace names. Okay, and you can see now it's set that. Now it's set it up the link. So I've now got a link from my Git repo on my computer or in this cloud project to the actual GitHub repo that I just set up. But I still need to push my work. So I'm gonna use the Git workflow push. Okay, and it's gonna ask you to put in your GitHub username. And then also a password. Sometimes a pop-up may be on your browser. So if you don't see this, you may get like a pop-up warning. So just bypass the pop-up warning in order to enter your password. Okay, I think I did something wrong. Cool. And now I have all of my workflow projects now sitting in my GitHub repo. So this is very cool. So on the slides, you'll see, okay, the next thing that we've done this already. Okay, so now we need to actually, so the nice thing about GitHub as well as GitLab, apparently, I haven't used GitLab, but John did say it's easier with GitLab. So you can host an actual website using GitHub pages. So it's as easy as pointing GitHub to where you want it to host the files from. So in here, we go back to this and I go to settings. Is everyone fine to see this?
Maybe you could make it just one notch slightly larger.
Is that a bit better? Okay, cool. So then now you go to settings on your actual GitHub repo, and then you navigate to the bottom. So it's under this GitHub pages. So you can see at the moment it's none, but if you drop down here, you'll be able to pick your master branch. And here, if you save it as root, it's not going to find anything because all of the HTML documents get populated in the docs folder. So here you can just say, hey, go and get it from my docs folder. Okay, so let's just go back again and see. Okay, so this is because I'm trying to do it before it's set it up nicely. So if you also experience this problem, you can just put in the index.html and voila, you have a site set up for your analysis in a few easy steps. And it has all of the same things here. So you can see your past versions. If you linked your Spotify analysis, you can see also in here. Any past versions will appear on here. So that's quite cool. I can't remember if there's anything else. Yes, so now this reproducibility challenge. As far as I know, it uses the date. And when we use the date on the day of the use R tutorials, we all had the same output. So everyone who ran it on that day had the same output. So this was the day that it was actually run, and you can actually override the seed. I'm not exactly sure what the command is to override the seed, but you can set your own seed. So you don't have to use behind the scenes workflowr's one. You can just use one that you set up yourself. But we did actually have everyone got the same result on the day of the tutorial. If we look here, though, it doesn't seem to be the case. Like if you look here, the set seed, yeah, okay, cool. So the seed does seem to be the actual one that we used for this day. Cool, and I think that's about it. We've seen the session info. It'll also be on the same Spotify analysis. There's some extra information here that John has put together. He also did a YR talk, I think, a couple of, maybe a month or so ago. So that'll also be useful as another step if you'd like to watch him actually give the tutorial. The problem with the use R one was we couldn't record it because we did a lot of breakout work in breakout rooms. Yeah. Then the other thing is I've also, so I've been playing with it. And one of the things is that for me, I use like images and I use GIFs sometimes in my work, in my RMD documents. So just if you're looking for it, you put it in the, you need to create in the docs folder an asset subfolder. And then you just say, when you're using an image, you'll say, look in the docs folder, in the assets folder for your actual image file. Or I guess you could call it anything. You could call it images if you want. Yeah, and I've been using it for, I'm trying to study for the RStudio certification, and I've been using it for my actual preparation. So one of the things is under chapter 6, like the workflow projects. So there's a couple of projects here of chapters done. And then under workflow projects, I just have a few of the commands that are useful for workflow, because I found it really useful after learning about it. Cool, I think that's it for me.
If anyone wants to ask some more questions, you're welcome.
Yes, please. So I guess I have a question. Do you use Workfloor for every analysis that you set up, or is it for specific projects, or how do you pick and choose?
So I think you have to use it for public projects. So I think GitLab may allow you to only want to let this repository be seen by a select few people. And I think it may even do it on the free version, but I haven't used it enough to be like I could be like mistaken here. But that one may allow that if you want to share something with your colleagues only, but it's not yet ready for the public domain, or it's never going to be ready. For example, for me, I work in a corporate domain, and a lot of our analysis is not, I can't share it. So I can't actually use a workflow project for that. So I use it for my side projects, like studying, when I need to make notes for myself.
Nice. There's a comment that says, I have found that Workfloor does not work with Flex Dashboard. Have you tried that before?
No, so I did see that. Sorry.
I don't know Flex dashboard. Do you know it, Bosh?
I know. So I think it's because of the actual underlying. So John did say that it also doesn't work very nicely with like a book down, because book down also has its own structure. And it's kind of leveraging the same things that he's trying to leverage with workflowr. He said that someone may have done something hacky for blog down, I think, but it seems as though it's more difficult with the kind of out of the box where they do host the pages for you, like a book down and a blog down and maybe even a package down. Because it's also kind of leveraging the same things, it's going to cause a conflict. And I think Flex dashboard may be similar.
That makes sense. There's a question that says, does workflowr check for package versions? I know the session info will report the versions, but does it actually check?
Like it doesn't check, so it just reports. It'll say, here's my versions that I use. So if you want to reproduce this code and get the same results, these are the packages that you need to use to actually get that results.
Yeah. If there was an error that it wouldn't run, then you'll get the error with the knitting already.
Yes.
But otherwise, the package version, like Babash says, is to check that you're running on the same package.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Does any of the audience members worked with workflowr? Do they have comments on it? All right.
Okay, just be kind. It's a work in progress.
It seems really helpful. Thank you for sharing it.
Cool.
Are there any other questions about upcoming Our Ladies Baltimore events? Any other questions in general we can answer for you? All right. Well, I hope you guys found this workshop interesting. I found it incredibly interesting, and I plan to incorporate this into my workflows. So let's give a round of applause to Inger and Babash and say thank you so much for preparing this presentation and coming and visiting us today. I really appreciate it. And unless there are any other comments, we will maybe adjourn early. Does that sound good?
Thanks for inviting us. And it was nice to meet another Our Ladies group.
I know.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming. It was really wonderful to have you. It's really, really fun that there's so many people from all over who are joining today too. We hope you'll be able to make it to some of our future meetings as well. Yeah. I guess it's, one of the few upsides to the fact that we can't be in person. By doing things online, we can all be together even though we're very far from each other. So
yeah. All right. Well, I wish everybody a great day, and I hope to see everybody at the next meetup in November. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Stephanie.